That is my phone making noise. I'm going to make sure that my phone stops making noise. I don't know if you can hear that in the background.
A little bit.
Okay. We are going to talk today about starting HTML. And before we get started on HTML, we're going to talk a little bit about what responsibilities we have as web developers. And this is something that's very close to my heart, and I hope that all of you will learn to love as well. So this is what HTML looks like. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it is what we call a markup language. So we had a brief look last session at Markdown, and this is markup. And what it means is we have a language that is decorating the content of our site, and it gives us things like text and links and titles and paragraphs and lists of things that give our content what we call semantic structure. So it gives it meaning without altering its visual layout. And web browsers will interpret our HTML to understand how it should be displayed. And markup is what will help your browser understand which bit of the web page is text and which bit is a link and which bit is an image and which bit is a heading. And markup gives an understanding of the utility and the hierarchy of the content that you're writing. So we're going to have a look at different HTML elements and their semantic meanings. And from the names of these elements, you should be able to make educated guesses as to how you might expect them to display on the page and what the purpose of them might be. Markup is there to give our content meaning, and it is the source code of the web. But browsers aren't the only computer program that actually reads and parses markup. There's a whole bunch of assistive technologies that read HTML and present it to the user, and it might do so in ways that we are perhaps not expecting when we're first designing our web pages. And this is super important to keep in mind because there are plenty of people that have a different range of restrictions, impairments, constraints, preferences that might make using a browser more difficult for them. So in order to work well with software written to help these users access the internet, we have to strive to make the content that we're writing and the HTML that we're writing as accessible as possible. Because they might be using, for example, a screen reader, which will read out the text to them instead of displaying it visually. And this means that your markup needs to indicate to them what the layout of the page is without them being able to even see it. And accessibility is an incredibly nuanced and detailed field that affects a lot of people, a lot more than you might think. And in this session, we're going to examine how and why that is. So if we take a sort of broad look at it, when we say that a site is accessible, what we mean is that the content is available and its functionality can be used by everyone and anyone. And it's sometimes easy for us as developers to assume that all users are perhaps using a keyboard and all users are using a mouse, or that everyone on a phone has a touchscreen, or that everyone has a fast internet connection. And this has a tendency to lead us to build experiences that work well for some people, but exclude other people. And we can do this by accidentally creating issues that range from simple annoyances to absolute showstoppers that stop people from using the internet completely. And accessibility is about inclusion. So remember last session I said that Tim Berners-Lee said that the internet is for everyone. We want to build sites and apps that everyone can use. We don't want to exclude people. And accessibility concerns users who are experiencing some kind of impairment or disability, but it can also cover people who are experiencing a temporary or perhaps a non-physical disability. So if we think about examples of these, a non-physical impairment might include something like you've got a migraine and you can't look at fast-moving animations because they make the migraine worse, or you have vertigo and when there's a fast scroll, it makes you feel dizzy. Or maybe you struggle reading particular fonts because you have dyslexia. And things like temporary impairments would include things like being unable to use your keyboard because you've broken your wrist, or you're holding your baby, or for me, your cat is climbing on you, or you maybe step out into bright light and you can't read what's on your phone because the contrast of the colors isn't high enough and you've just stepped out into bright light. And developers tend to use this idea of temporary impairments to help their teams to empathize with those who have long-term impairments, to help them understand the importance of building accessibility into their products. But really, the reason why we care so much about accessibility is that it's the right thing to do. We shouldn't be excluding people from using the products that we're building. And Microsoft actually has some really excellent resources on inclusive design, which I will share the link to in the chat right now. That whole booklet that they've put together is just really brilliant in understanding what we can do to better build accessible websites and why accessibility is so important. And there is an entire standards committee dedicated to this called the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And so the Standards Committee publishes this series of guidelines that help us as developers to understand how we can better make the web accessible. And these standards are ever evolving, like web technologies themselves, and they track changes in accessible technology. So just like we need to stay on top of how the languages are changing, we need to stay on top of how accessibility best practices are changing. And the WCAG is based on 4 core principles. So we have perceivability, operability, understandability, and robustness. And you can read more about them at this link here, which I will also put into the chat. So if we just do a brief rundown of each of these, let's first have a look at what perceivability means. So we need to, for example, provide text alternatives for any non-text content so that it can be changed into forms that other people might need. So for example, we should have a large print option, we should have braille options, we should have speech options, we can use things like symbols and simpler language. For time-based media, for example, a video, we should also include perhaps a textual screenplay or a script of that video so that people can read it if they would prefer. If you have to trigger an event at the end of a video playing, we need to make sure that there are alternate ways to trigger that event happening. And we need to create content that can be presented in different ways. So if we are, for example, building a very simple text-based website, we can, for example, consider offering a high contrast version or a printable version, or the ability to turn animations off, or even to use like light and dark mode. These are, accessibility options. And if we're putting text over an image, we need to make sure that it's possible to read the text in the image. So, we're not putting white text on a very light colored image, for example. If there's music playing on a website, this is everybody's pet peeve, make sure it's possible to turn that music off. And if we are putting graphics on a page, make sure we're putting nice descriptions of those graphics in as well. Then if we talk about operability, we need to make sure that all functionality is available from a keyboard and not rely on the users having a mouse. So if we've got functionality bound to a click event, for example, we've got a button that the user needs to click on, we need to make sure they can also tab to it with their keyboard and press enter to select that button. We need to make sure that we provide users enough time to read the content on the page. So if we've got auto scrolling text, they need to be able to slow it or stop it. Don't design content in a way that might trigger seizures. So no flashing content, no bright flashing animations. And if you do need to show those things, make sure that you put a warning up so that users can navigate away if they need to. And make sure that users can navigate the content in your site using the keyboard again. So using tab, using the arrow keys, using the enter button and the space button. And this is where our semantic markup can really help, along with using headings correctly and without skipping heading levels. And we will cover that a bit later on in this lesson. And then we also want to make sure that our content is readable and understandable. So we want to use clear language where we can, use multiple ways of explaining something. So we can use images, illustrations, video, audio, symbols, iconography, that kind of thing to make usability easier. We should make sure that our web pages appear and operate in predictable ways. So we've all used the internet. We all know what clicking on a link should do. We don't want interfaces that are going to surprise us or confuse us. So, for example, if you're trying to fill in a form, the drop down should drop down a list of options. Clicking on one should make that option the selected option. Don't change the way that basic user interfaces work. And if you do have to do that, warn or advise the user in advance and help them to correct mistakes. So I'm sure you've seen this before. When you're filling in a form, we have something called validation. So if you make a mistake, like the box turns red, or you get a little notification saying like, this needs to be in this shape, or this is a required field, that kind of thing. Make sure that you're holding the user's hand as much as possible through their experience of using your website. And content should be well formed so that it can be parsed successfully by browsers. There is validators that exist. So I put the link for the validator there. I'll put it in the chat as well. And we can use tools like this validator to make sure that our HTML is correctly put together, that we haven't, for example, missed any closing tags that might break something in the browser or might cause it to be rendered incorrectly. And we'll talk about this again a bit later on. This used to be a real problem in older browsers. Back when I started learning web development, if you forgot to close a tag, your entire website would just render as plain text, or sometimes you'd accidentally render the entire website in the heading size font and everything would be huge. And browsers are a lot more forgiving these days. They're a lot better at guessing where you meant to close the bracket, but better to be safe than sorry. And there's a whole load of tools that you can use, which will help you to build accessible websites as you go. So we have screen readers. These are sort of the best known of the accessibility tools. It's a software application that enables people with severe visual impairments to use a computer by reading the page audibly or by displaying it in Braille, so you can get Braille keyboards. And screen readers work closely with the computer's operating system. So they will provide things like information about icons, information about menus, about links, about images, about the structure of your page. And since the majority of screen reader users don't use a mouse, screen readers use a variety of different keyboard commands. So we can use specific semantic markup, which will help them to navigate through our page and understand the hierarchy of our content, understand the layout of the page. There's A bunch of useful tools that you can use here if you want to check it. So if you're using Chrome, there are some extensions that you can use which will add a screen reader into your browser, or you can turn on the screen reader as part of your operating system. I think I've got an example of one from Edge here in a link. I don't have the Chrome one to hand, but if you search for Chrome screen reader extension, I'm sure there are many of them. There's some excellent talks on this. If you've ever, if you've never seen somebody using a screen reader, there's a member of the WCAG called Leonie Watson who has made some truly excellent videos on screen reader usage. I highly recommend looking up her videos and her talks. And just give it a go yourself, just to see how incredibly frustrating it is when a website has been built without accessibility. Try turning off your screen and using a screen reader just to see what it is that screen reader users are having to deal with on a day-to-day basis when a website is built poorly. So another tool that's commonly used by people with vision impairments is zooming, where they will literally zoom into an area of a website that they need to be able to see clearer. And this is often done with the keyboard commands, so pressing Control+ and then Control- to zoom in and out. This kind of zoom causes the entire page to resize. So if you try that in your browser now, press Control and plus or Control and minus, you'll see it happening on your screen. And what can happen is that the choice of, for example, font size that the developer has used can change what happens to the layout of the page, can change whether or not the font zooms properly or not. So we need to be really careful about the font sizes that we choose and the layouts that we choose, that they continue to work when the screen is zoomed in. And we will talk about the different kinds of responsive font sizes that we can use now with modern CSS. And then your operating systems also have magnifiers built in. So on Windows, we've got magnifier. Mac OS and iOS have a magnification software called Zoom, which literally just takes a section of the page and zooms in on it. And one that I use a lot when I'm presenting, I don't think I actually have it turned on this machine, is when you move your mouse cursor fast, it makes the cursor larger, which helps draw the eye back to where it is. Not particularly web-based, but interesting to know about nonetheless. I spoke briefly last lesson when we were talking about the tools that we're going to use about contrast checkers. Some users find it difficult to read text if the contrast is between the colors of the text and the background is too low. So if you take a look at this slide here, you can see we've got a light gray bit of text on a white background, and it's much harder to read, especially if you have slightly blurry vision. So the WCAG gives us some guidelines which give a percentage rating to how high contrast should be to make it standards compliant, to make it readable or not. And font family and font weight and font size can also have an impact on this. So you need to double check that your font at size 20 might be compliant, but your font at size 14 might not be. And compliancy checkers are built into the browser, and we will be having a look at them a bit later on as well. And browsers are generally really good at allowing users to navigate through a website if it has been built with good semantic HTML. And problems start to occur when developers try to make overcomplicated or flashy functionality with JavaScript and forget to check whether or not their websites work with a mouse. And links and form elements and buttons should all be usable by pressing the tab button on your keyboard and then pressing enter to hit the link or to interact with the button. But some form elements are easier to use than others when we're talking about keyboard only navigation. So consider a form where it asks you to input your birth date. It would be simplest to offer the user a text input where they can type in their birth date. But if we do that, this sort of free form text, they might type in, so for example, my birthday is January the 1st. They might type in January the 1st. They might type in 01.01. They might type in 01/01, which means that we as developers need to do a lot of work on validation on what has been entered to make sure it's in the format that our backend can understand. And a lot of developers, instead of doing this validation work, opt for a less user-friendly but easier to validate option, like using drop-downs. So imagine instead of offering a free-form text, I put in a drop-down that just has the numbers 1 to 31 and then the numbers 1 to 12 to put the birthday in, and I have to click the first drop-down and then select 1 and then click the second drop-down and select 1. And that's a much less pleasant user experience for me, and especially for users who are less experienced with using browsers, filling in forms. I watched a talk by a developer called Alice Bartlett, who wrote a whole thing on why you shouldn't use drop downs, why we shouldn't be using selects, in which she was working for the .gov website, and she was doing some usability testing with them, and a pensioner was trying to fill in a form to get parking for his car, and he had to put today's date in, and he couldn't work out that when you click on a select, you have to then click on the option. So he was hovering over the option and then clicking off, and every time it just deselected his selection, and he had to do this 3 times, and it took him more than 2 hours to input a date using these 3 drop downs. It absolutely broke my heart. I was crying at the end of this talk. This is the video of the talk if you want to watch it. Just consider your users, consider making the experience as pleasant as possible for your users. Otherwise, we can create these sort of heartbreaking scenarios that are happening that we don't even know about. And it is going to happen regularly in your careers as web developers, that you're going to be presented with a beautiful, subtle design that you have to code up, and you have to be the one who makes a stand for accessibility and says, these colors aren't contrast compliant, or we need to use native elements rather than styling up some fancy form. But never forget that there is no excuse for excluding users, especially if you're working somewhere like .gov, a governmental website where it's imperative that everyone needs to be able to use what you build. As I said earlier, accessibility is just the right thing to do. And there are a whole bunch of tools that can help us to test our accessibility. This one, which is developed by Google, is called Lighthouse, and it's open source, it's automatic, and you can use it to check the accessibility of any website that you build, and it's built into your browser. And what we can do is we can audit a page, and Lighthouse is going to run a whole load of tests against that page and generate a report on how well the page did. And from there, we can use the failing tests as indicators on areas where we might be able to improve. So why don't we look at an example? Can anybody give me a URL of a website that I should test the accessibility of? I'm going to have a brief drink of water while you think of something for me. Okay, we have had a suggestion. Nice. Okay, thank you. I'm going to drag that into the other browser, and I'm just going to share this tab instead. Okay, so we've had this website suggested. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to bring up the inspect tools. Can you see those? You cannot see those. Okay, let me stop sharing, and instead I'm going to share the whole window. There we go. Okay, so what I did there was I right clicked and chose the inspect option, and this has brought up these tools here. And from here, we should be able to click on the Lighthouse tab. So this is the Lighthouse tab, and I'm going to say, generate me a report on this. And I want to, for now, we're just going to have a look at the accessibility options. And let's try it out. So we've got an accessibility score here of 85. And we can see here it's telling us that the background and foreground colors don't have a sufficient contrast ratio. So it's suggesting that maybe that green needs to be a little bit darker. The links don't have a name. So we've got some links here that don't have text on them. Sorry if this is your website and I'm tearing it apart. But you can see here we've got a whole bunch of interesting things that we can action going forwards to make our websites more accessible. And we'll be having a look at Lighthouse as we build as well. But let's jump back into our slides. So we've talked about the WCAG and the way they articulate their accessibility standards. So let's go through some actual practical tips. And firstly, the name accessibility, for me, this always feels inaccessible myself. You'll see it written as A11Y because there's 11 letters between the A and the Y, so it gets shortened to A11Y or ALI as a shortening for accessibility. Why make the word less accessible? Anyway, let's talk about A11Y. So as I've said a few times today already, the most important thing that you can do for your website is to use semantic markup. And HTML5 came out quite a while ago now. And when it came out, it brought out literally hundreds of semantically named tags for us to use. So we need to make sure that we use them rather than just the generic div element, which again, we will talk about a little bit later. But if we have a look here, we have a header, a main, a footer, an H1, which is a heading 1 all the way through to heading 6. We have a nav, an article, a paragraph, a button. Just by seeing the names of these elements, you can make a sort of sensible assumption about where you might expect these elements to be on the page and what you might expect them to be used for. So, for example, you see header, you're going to make, I assume, the sensible assumption that that's going to be somewhere up the top of the page. The nav is going to contain some sort of navigation to help me get around the website. A paragraph is going to be a chunk of text. A H1, a heading 1, I would expect to be above a chunk of text. I would expect a footer to be at the bottom of the page. I would really love to see you all using as many semantic elements as possible when you're writing. I mentioned earlier that screen readers rely heavily on the hierarchy of the page. They really rely on headings to find information and to navigate through the page. So we need to make sure that we're writing descriptive heading content and we're using semantic heading tags as much as possible. And it may be tempting to think, your designer hands you a beautiful design and it's got a big heading at the top, and then underneath that, a very small heading, and then a chunk of text. It might be tempting to think that that first heading should be an H1, and then the second heading that you see is very small, so maybe that should be an H4, which we absolutely should not do. The second heading should always be an H2. Don't skip heading tags. This heading order, this heading hierarchy is about the layout of the page and not how they look. So we always remember HTML is content and CSS is style. So CSS is the way that stuff looks. So we can style those headings to be whatever size we want them to look, but we need to make sure that the heading hierarchy is always in order. Otherwise, your poor screen reader users are going to be like, okay, heading 1, heading 4, wait a second, where was 2 and 3? Have I missed some content? Has my screen reader missed something? Have I got lost on the page? Always make sure you're using your headings in order. And of course, we will go over this a bit more once we start writing HTML. Images on the page have 2 different uses. So try and use your images responsibly. If you're putting an image on the page that is a contentful image, always provide alt attributes on your image tag. So this is alternative text that describes what's in the image. If an image is purely decorative, for example, a border on the page, or a nice bit of design work, some floaty clouds or something, then we make it a background image. We don't make it content on the page, so that it doesn't, the screen reader doesn't need to say there's a floaty cloud on the page. The user, it's not part of the content. The user doesn't need that information. So let's take a look at 2 examples here. So I've got an image there of my cat Pickle. And if I was putting this image on the page, it is content. I want to show you a picture of Pickle. So I have used an image tag here. So here we can see this. This is the HTML. I've used an image tag. This links to the file. And then this alt tag here is providing alternative text. And it's this nice bit of descriptive alternative text. So it's telling the screen reader to read this out to our visually impaired users so that they know what Pickle is looking like as well. Whereas down here, you can see we've got 3 buttons, and those buttons have these little visual icons on them, but the icons aren't really part of the content. They're not, it doesn't need to be read out. We don't need to say, backwards arrow back, forwards arrow forwards. So we make these background images, which is what we're doing here in the CSS, and they don't need a description and they don't need to be read out loud. There's a whole bunch of really cool tools out there which are doing automatic generation of alt attributes. I don't know if you've ever looked at the if you've ever inspected the page of a Facebook page, but Facebook for quite a few years now has been doing some automatic generation of image alt text. So if you right click on a Facebook page, let's do this now. I haven't logged into Facebook in years. Let's try it. Am I even going to be able to log in? Okay, cool. So let's find a picture here. Okay, here's an example. So if I right click on this and choose inspect, and then we have a look at this image here. Let's see, can I see what this is? So maybe an image of 2 people and a Segway. So that's Facebook auto-generating that caption using machine learning by sort of guessing what is in the page. It quite often does a better job than that. That's not the best one I've ever seen. Let's see what it thinks of this one. Maybe an image of 4 people, suit and wedding. well, it's got the wrong number of people there. Okay, so Facebook isn't doing such a great job anymore. But they were one of the first websites that started to implement this auto generation of image alt text, and I think it's really interesting. But we as humans can write our own alt text and should try and be as descriptive as possible. We're really just trying to help our visually impaired users to see as much of what is on the page as our not visually impaired users. And then there's a whole bunch of tools that we can use called ARIA, which are the Accessible Rich Internet Applications. And it's a set of attributes that we can add onto our HTML to define the ways that it can be used. So we can, for example, add in form hints and error messages. And we can, so you can see here, I've just got a generic div element. So the div doesn't mean anything. It's just a division. We've put a block on the page. But I can use my ARIA values to describe what is actually happening within this div. So we can say the role is progress bar. It has a value now of 75, a value min of 0, and a value max of 100. So with this information, we can sort of make a sensible guess about what this thing is. It's a progress bar. The progress has moved up to 75 from 0, and it has to go to 100. An ARIA should be thought of as a supplement. So you use it alongside your semantic markup instead of a replacement. So if you can't find a native element with the correct functionality, then you use ARIA. So for example, there is no native HTML element for a progress bar. So we end up using the generic div element and using ARIA. And this is going to be picked up by the screen reader and read aloud to inform the user how far along the progress bar is, which is super cool. So that was a sort of whirlwind tour into accessibility, but now we're going to actually start doing some practical work. We're going to start writing some HTML. And over the next few lessons, what we're going to do is we're going to make a portfolio website so that you'll be able to show off your new web development skills. And we're going to put the 2 projects that we build into the portfolio website. Oh, Puff has come to visit. Hello, Puff. And the website that we're going to build is going to look like this. So this is our beautiful website. Oh, look, my photograph is broken. Here we go. There. So, all of my photographs are broken. How annoying. Okay, well, we can fix that as we go. This is what we're going to build over the next couple of lessons, and let's talk about it now. So let's go over a few semantic HTML elements, and you might want to take notes of these because what we're going to do is, as we build, I'm going to ask you which elements you think we should be using. So I'm going to go through a few semantic elements that we definitely will be using. So make a mental note of them, make a physical note of them, whatever is the best way for you to learn. So the first element that we are definitely going to use on this page is the main element. So this is the, as it says here, the dominant content of the document. So this is considered the most important part of our content. And for our screen reader users, this is where the screen reader is going to jump to read our information. It's where we want to put the central content of our website, the main content. The hint is in the name. Then we have the header, which is usually situated at the top of the page. It's usually going to contain some sort of navigation, contain the title of the page, maybe a logo, anything that you might expect to be up the top of the page. We have a footer, which is usually found at the bottom of the page. And a footer is where, it's where we would usually say things like copyright information or links to other pages. It's where our sort of contact me section might be. Anything that you would expect to be down the bottom of the page. Then we have the nav element, which is where we are going to put links to help the user navigate around the site. And these can either be links which take you to another page, or they can be links that take you further down the document itself. And so, as it says here, common examples of our navigation sections are things like menus, tables of content, indexes, that kind of thing. Then we have a section, which is a generic container of a particular cut of the design. So it doesn't have, let's imagine, for example, you're building a portfolio site and you have an About Me section, and you have a gallery section, and you have a Contact Me section. These are sections usually contain a heading, and they're going to contain some text. Yes, sections, in fact, must contain a heading. The next element that we're going to look at is the article. So articles are used for repeating patterns of HTML. So a repeating collection of elements. You can think of it as like, it's less like a newspaper article and more like a so imagine you've got a blog website, and the blog website has a bunch of links to different blogs on the site, and each link to the blog has a title, which is a clickable link, and a little image, and then some blurb describing what the blog post is about, and then a read more link. All of those collections of elements would be an article, and that article will be repeated on the page. So anytime we have a repeated chunk of HTML, we should be thinking that's an article. We have the block quote element, which is, it does what it says on the tin. It is used to put a quote on the page. And inside of the block quote, we can have a cite element, which is used to put the citation, so the name of the person who gave the quote. We have our heading elements, which I've talked about a lot already. So we have H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, and H6. And these should be used to describe the hierarchy of the page. So H1 is going to be the highest. So H1 is going to be probably the description or the name of your site. And then we use H1 to denote when new sections of the page are starting. UL stands for unordered list, and this represents a list of things on the page. Unordered means that it has bullets to the side of each list item, and ULs must contain LIs, which are list items. So a UL is the list, and then each item inside that is a list item. And a UL is an unordered list, it is bulleted. Then we have an OL, which is an ordered list, which will be typically rendered as having numbers down the side, but you can also change it so that it has letters down the side, ABC, or Roman numerals down the side. The important difference being that the order is important. So for example, if you're writing a recipe and people need to do the steps in a certain order, you would use an OL rather than a UL. For example, if you had a gallery of photos and each item in the gallery was a list item, it doesn't really matter which order the photos go in, so you would use a UL for that. And again, the OL can only contain list item elements. And then inside our list item, we can put whatever we want. The list item, as I said, represents each item in the list and can contain anything we want. It can contain headings, it can contain paragraphs, it can contain other ULs, it can contain images, whatever you want. P is a paragraph tag, and paragraphs are blocks of text. I hope I don't need to explain what a paragraph is. We would usually expect a paragraph to have a blank line underneath it before the next paragraph starts. We have anchor tags, and this is where naming in HTML gets a bit confusing. So anchor tags link to different web pages, they can link to files, they can link to email addresses. It is what we would consider a link. Unfortunately, a link element in HTML is actually something else. So whenever you see somebody says like click on the link, what they're actually saying is click on the anchor. And an anchor can link to a different page in your site, a completely different website, or it can link to a different piece of text further down or above in your website. And we will absolutely be using anchor tags and looking at anchor tags when we are building our HTML. Then we have the generic div element, and this is just a generic divider. So it has no semantic meaning. It won't affect the way the content is laid out on the page. And when I said I want to see you all using semantic markup, what I don't want to see is a whole bunch of divs. And you will see this as you move around the internet, and you will see this on bad tutorials where they just tell you to use divs for everything. It doesn't help our screen reader users, it doesn't help our keyboard users. So as much as possible, use any other element apart from a div. And then if there's nothing that is semantically appropriate, then we can use a div. But a div is just a generic divider. Then we have a generic inline element. Now, we've not talked about block and inline elements yet, and I will talk about these a lot more later on, so don't worry too much about this. But we can think of a span as like when you are writing a Word document and you highlight a chunk of text and you maybe make it bold, or you give it a yellow background, like you sort of highlighted it with a highlighter pen. That's an inline element, so it's part of a chunk of text. Inline elements, the same as divs, have no effect on the way the content is laid out until you apply some styling. And the span element is specifically for that. So it allows you to add some styling into a paragraph without changing the semantic meaning of the text in that paragraph. You may have seen the BR element in your movement around the internet. BR is specifically used to create a line break. It's not made for adding space between things. So it's useful if you're writing poetry on the web, or if you're writing an address where a new line is required, a line break. Apart from that, I don't want to see you using BRs. I've seen it all over the web where people use BRs to create space between paragraphs. That is literally what the paragraph element is for. You'll notice, so far, all of the elements that we've looked at have an opening element and a closing element. So here we have open bracket div, and then this angle bracket line div is our closing element. The BR doesn't have that. The BR is what we call self-closing. And the reason for that is because you can't put anything inside a BR. It is literally just a line break. So we don't need that closing element there. Similarly to the BR, we have the image element, which is also self-closing, because we can't put we can't put text inside an image. All we can do is link to a file. So the image doesn't have a closing tag, but it does have a source attribute, which we saw earlier in the pickle example. And as I mentioned, it should also have a alt attribute. And again, we will obviously be looking at these a lot more in future, and you will absolutely get used to the usage of all of these. So here is a list of all of the elements that I've just described. So what we're going to do is I'm going to break up the design of the portfolio that we're going to build, and I'm going to ask you which of these elements you think that we should be using to build each section, and then we're going to build it. So let's look at the top. You might want to take a screenshot of this list if you didn't already write it down. So I will leave it there for a minute for you to grab while I have a drink of water. And let's move on. So we have at the top of our design, we have this section here where we have an introduction to ourselves and we have a little button. So what elements do you think we should use for this part of the page here? So just this section in white. You can put it in the chat, or if you're feeling brave, you may be able to unmute yourself and say hello. I don't know if that's possible. Yep, a header. Nice. Love it. That's exactly what we want. Anything else? A span, an H1. Yep, exactly. I love it. What about this thing here? A div. How dare you? Karim, get out. A button. It could be a button. I see what you're thinking about it being a nav, but it's only one element at the moment. So it's not really a navigation because it's not a collection. We don't need a section just yet, but we will need a section. Where is the list, Karim? You're just trolling me at this point. So I'm going to put you all out of your misery. So like we said, we are going to have a header. Then we're going to have an H1. And this element here is going to be an anchor tag. So this is an anchor that is going to link us to some content that is further down the page. So let's actually open up our text editors and let's write this out. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to start sharing my text editor. And we're going to get this written up. So for those of you who were here in lesson 1, what we have done so far is we have created a folder called workshop somewhere on our computer. And we have made a README file inside of that folder. And then what I've done here is I've got Visual Studio Code installed and I have opened up that folder. So I'm just going to close that now, in fact, and we'll go from the very beginning. Is it going to let me close it? Fine. Okay. So what you'll want to do is go to File, Open Folder, and and then just navigate to your workshop folder. If you don't have the workshop folder created already, then create it, select that folder, and inside here we are going to create a new file. So you're going to go to File, New File, and it's going to be called index.html. And it's going to prompt you to save that, and you are going to say create file. So now we have our new HTML file in here. Everybody in the chat, give me a thumbs up when you have your new HTML file. Going to give everyone a little while just to catch up with us. Awesome. Okay, so we are going to write some HTML. And the first thing that our HTML needs is we need to tell it what this document is. And this is, it's kind of a holdover from the bad old days. So when I was first learning markup, there were a whole load of different ways of writing markup. There were a whole load of different standards. And we used to have to tell the browser what standard of markup we were using when we were writing. But now that HTML5 has come out, we don't actually need to do that anymore, which is brilliant, but we still put the type into the HTML, and it's going to look like this. So we are going to say doc type is HTML. So what we've got here is an angle bracket with a exclamation mark, capital letters, doc type, and then just HTML. And what we are saying here is I am going to be writing HTML to the standard of HTML5. So that's the first thing that needs to go into our HTML file always. Then what we are going to do is we are going to put in an HTML tag. So all of the HTML that we're going to write is going to be inside of this tag here. And when I say inside, you can see I have written an opening tag and I've written a closing tag, and everything else that I write is going to be inside. And my editor, I don't know if you can see that there, but my editor has put in a space here. So we call this an indentation. And every time we open a new HTML tag, we indent by 1. And the reason why we do that is it makes it easier for us as humans to see where we've opened and closed pairs. The computer doesn't care. As far as the computer is concerned, we could write all of our HTML on one line. But we do this for ourselves and for our colleagues so that we can make sure that we don't forget to close tags. So our HTML is broken up into 2 halves, much like a person. It has a head and a body. So the first thing that we're going to put in is head. And the second thing that we are going to put in is the body. And the head contains all the information about the page, and the body contains all the information that is the content of the page. So everything that you see when you navigate to a website, everything that you see displayed in the browser is in the body. And then the head contains information about that site. So we can put in a bunch of metadata in here to tell the browser a little bit more about our website. So we can put in a name of the website, and we can put in an author, and we can give it a description. And these are the things that will show up in Google when you search for a thing and it has a little description. There's one more thing that we need to put onto our page at the moment to make this valid HTML. At the moment, this isn't valid. The one final thing that we need to put in is a title inside the head. And the title is going to be the name of our website. So for me, this is going to be My Awesome Portfolio. Stunning. So what you're going to do now is you're going to save that. Oh, and my linter has just jumped in and ruined all my formatting. Brilliant. Never mind. We're going to save that, and we are going to open it up in a browser. Now, there's two different ways that you can do this. There's a really brilliant tool. So if you're on Visual Studio Code, if you go into your extensions tab here, which is this little one that's got 3 blocks and a floaty block, and you type in live server, there is an excellent tool here by Ritwick Day, which allows you to serve your website into your browser, and it'll refresh as you make changes. So I highly recommend installing this. So if you click on the install button, it should install it into Visual Studio Code. And then you might need to restart your Visual Studio Code for it to work. So if you install that, then close and reopen Visual Studio Code, what you should get is a little go live button down here in the bottom. So if I click this, what that's going to do is open up my website in a browser. So if I drag that over to my other window for a second, so I'm just going to stop sharing and start sharing my browser window. You should be able to see this stunning website that we have just put together. Absolutely beautiful. Excellent work, everybody. And hopefully you should be able to see the information that you've put in your title. Can everybody see where that is showing up? Nice. So you can see here that text that we put in the title is showing up in the tab here. So it might look like we've not written any content yet, but we have. Awesome. Okay, so let's jump back into the editor and let's start writing that website that we just spoke about. So you all very rightly said that we want to start with a header. And inside that header, we want to put in an H1. And that H1 is going to have our text in it. So it's going to say, hello, my name is, put your own name in here. My name is Jo Franchetti. I'm a web developer. And then we are, as you all also rightly said, I'm going to turn on screen wrap for this, word wrap. There we go. My name is Jo Franchetti. I'm a web developer. And if we take a brief look at the design, oh, this is annoying. I'm going to have to swap back to the other browser again. Hang on. So you all very rightly said that we should put a span here. Now, this design, the dotted lines make this slightly confusing, but there is one more element that we could add in here. Can anybody see what it might be? Silence in the chat. A section, not a section quite yet. It could be a P, but it's not really. So yes, we're definitely going to have a span. Definitely. So your name is going to be inside a span. But what you can't quite see here, because there's not quite enough space, I've put in a line break here. So I'm a web developer to drop onto the next line. So I'm going to put a BR in there as well. So let's absolutely wrap our own name in a span. And then I'm going to not only drop this onto a new line in my editor, but I'm going to put a BR on the end there after the full stop. And then after the H1, I'm going to put in that anchor tag. And the anchor tag needs to have an href. So an href is the hyperlink where that thing is going to link to. So my anchor tag needs an href attribute. And we don't know where that is going to link to just yet. And when you're developing a page and you don't know where your link is going to go to, the standard thing to do is just to put a hash in there. So we're just going to do that. Isn't it bad practice to use a BR inside an H1? I don't know. Let's have a look. H1 tag isn't meant for listing items. H1 has a content mode of phrasing content, so no, it's fine. BR inside an H tag is fine as far as I can tell. But if you do have a link where someone's talking about not using one, please do share. I'd be really interested to read that. And so inside our little anchor tag here, we're going to put in some text which says find out more. And now if we swap over into our browser, one day I'll find a solution to this that lets me swap easily between these two. We can see my content has updated, and now I can see, hello, my name is Jo Franchetti. I'm a web developer, and a link to find out more. Awesome. Everybody give me a thumbs up in the chat. Share entire screen instead of just a window. The problem is I have an ultra wide screen. So if I share the entire screen, you get this tiny little strip like this. I'm told there's a way to maybe create, if I use like OBS or something like that, there's a way to create a virtual screen within the screen. I haven't managed to get that working yet, but maybe I'll try it for future. Cool. Yeah. So give me a thumbs up in the chat if you've got your H1 and your anchor tag and you are good to go on to the next section. And of course, do ask any questions if you have any. Cool. Okay, let's move on to the next section. So we've got this about me. So here we have a sort of red box with some big text, some chunks of small text. I'm trying not to say the element names. Some chunks of small text, a picture, another button looking thing here. Section. Yes, Karen. P, yep, definitely we're going to be using a P. Oh, and then we have this thing here, which is a quote that a friend of mine said about me once. He told everybody that I was the front endist of front end developers. So that is also going to be in this thing. Block quote. Yep. So we've got a section, we've got a P, we've got a block quote. What else have we got here? We've got a few more things. H1. It could be an H1. We've got an image, we've got an H2 for shoresies, we've got an anchor tag, we've got a main. Yes, this is beautiful. Okay, so as you rightfully said, we have a main. Then we have a section. Inside of that section, we have an H2. So let's build that up into our markup. So after our header, we are going to put in the main. Inside the main, we are going to put in a section. Inside of the section, we are going to put in an H2, and the H2 is going to say about me. And in fact, you all already guessed all of the next things. So rather than swapping back to my slides, let's just put them in right now. So next up, we have Karen. What was that? Is that for people who aren't using Live Server? Oh, to have a browser tab in VS Code. Oh, interesting. Okay. I kind of love that. Let's try that out. I wonder if we try it at 550, because that's the one that I'm browsing to. This may require a bit more setup. I'm going to stick with jumping between the two for now, just because okay, localhost. I see I needed to go to index.html. The reason why I'm going to stick to jumping between, partially because I've got my slides in there and partially because we've got the inspect tool in our Chrome. But that is super cool. I will definitely look into that. I could also maybe look into using Visual Studio Code in the browser, which is also an option, which will in fact, let's take a brief look at that at the end of this class, because that's also super cool. Yes, so sidetracked. Let's put in our image. And this is going to be a VS Code also has inspect tools. Okay, cool. Our image is going to be a picture of us. So let's put that in. So an image needs to have a source and it needs to have alt text. And the source is going to point to the photo of yourselves. So source equals, and then alt equals. And what we're going to do is you're going to find a photo of yourselves or a photo of anything random from the internet. If you have a local photo of yourself, we're going to add it into the folder that we've saved everything in. If not, find the URL of an image. It could be a picture of a cat, it could be anything. Get the URL of an image from the internet, and that's going to go into the source. I'm going to just find a photo of myself that I have on my computer and add that in. There we go. Stunning photo of me. And so this here is now going to say jo.png. So that image is going to point to this image that I've saved in the same folder as my HTML. And the alt tag, I'm going to write some nice descriptive text. So for now, we could get obviously a lot more descriptive if we wanted to. I'll give you all a little while to find a photo. If you don't have a photo, Karim has very kindly put in picsome.photos. I quite like Place Kitten. That's my photo. I don't have the image yet, but I want a picture. This is Place Kitten, which gives you cute little kitten pictures. So you can just copy the URL there. So I could, for example, instead of having Jo in here, I could put in the Place Kitten URL, and then you can change the width and height of it. So I could change the width to be 500 and the height to be 400, and it would give me a different cat picture. Very useful if your designer hasn't finished making the graphics yet, but you need to put the website together. We are then going to put in our paragraphs. And much like Place Kitten, we haven't actually written this content yet. I will leave it to you to write some stunning copy about how brilliant you are and what things you love and why you built this portfolio. But for now, we're going to use something called lorem ipsum, which is used to create dummy text. So again, your designer hasn't finished writing the copy, your marketing team hasn't finished writing the copy, you haven't finished writing the copy, and you need just some text that will fill up some space. Lorem ipsum is your go-to tool for that. And what you're going to do, let me just swap to the browser again. So this is lorem ipsum. And what it does is it lets you generate paragraphs of dummy text. So we want 3 paragraphs, generate the lorem ipsum, and it's given me 3 paragraphs of dummy text. And the reason why we use lorem ipsum, or we use any of the ipsum generators that are out there, is because it's very easy to write content. You think you're being helpful by writing some dummy content that's sort of close to what the real content will be. But then it's very easy to miss when you're putting the website live that you put dummy content in there and that's not the real content. Whereas if we put lorem ipsum in here, it makes it very obvious that this needs to be swapped out at some point in the future. And what I'm just going to do here is I'm going to close and open paragraphs around each of these. So that needs a close, that needs an open. needs a close, and that needs a open. VS Code gives lorem ipsum. Nice. What's the shortcut for that? Nice. I love it. Oh, every day is a school day. So I don't know if you saw what I did there, but I just typed in into this P lorem and then click on this here or press the tab, and it's given me, oh, thank you. I'm not sharing my VS Code. So what I did there was I typed in a new paragraph and I just typed the word lorem in there, and you can see it's brought up this thing here. So if I click on this, it will give me lorem ipsum, or if I type lorem and press tab, it's going to do the same thing. And lorem ipsum is really interesting. It looks like Latin, but it's not actually Latin. It's actually complete nonsense text, sort of vaguely based on Latin. And the reason why this exists is because it's very easy to accidentally put something offensive on the page if you're putting text in that you can't actually read, or text in another language that you don't know what it says. And the nice thing about lorem ipsum is, you know, it's never going to offend anybody because it doesn't actually mean anything. It looks very close to Latin, but it isn't Latin. And if you're feeling fun and carefree, there's also a whole bunch of other ipsum generators. So there's kitten ipsum, there's Samuel L. Ipsum, which comes up with quotes from movies. There's 50 Shades of Lorem Ipsum, which nobody ever wanted. I recommend sticking with lorem ipsum. But there are other silly ones out there. There's also bacon ipsum. People be building silly things on the web. Okay, so back to our design. We have then a link. What, I can't even remember what it said in the link. My resume. So after those paragraphs, still inside the section, we're going to put in an anchor tag. Again, we don't have a link to our resume yet, but it could be a Google Doc. It could be another page on our website. We will build it up later. Now we're going to put in my resume or my CV or whatever it is that you would like to add in there. And then still inside this section, we're going to put in that block quote. So I'm going to put in block quote, and inside here, this is the quote from my friend Rich. You can put in any quote about yourselves or your favorite quote from somebody else, whatever you would like to put in here. And then after the text, we are going to put in our cite element and say who it was that said this. So Richard very much enjoys that he gets his name mentioned every time I run this course. Okie dokie, let's take a look at that in the browser. So hopefully you should have something that looks like this. We've got our header with our heading, we've got our link, we've got our H2, we've got an image, we've got a few paragraphs of text, we've got a link, and then we've got a quote. Everybody give me a thumbs up in the chat if you are with me. So I'm just going to scroll and put the HTML up for you here. There you go. Oh, I've put a div in there. Oh, we'll put that in later. It's fine. Awesome, awesome, awesome. We are steaming ahead. Okay, how long have we got? We've got half an hour. Excellent. I reckon we can get the next section done at least. Anybody got any questions about anything so far? No questions? Okay, let's move on then. Thank you, thank you. So this bit here, what are we going to use to build this out? I hope you can all see it clearly. A section. Yes, Colette. Very good. An H2. Absolutely. Articles. Yes, beautiful. Oh, you're also good at this. Image. 100%. A BR. No. An anchor tag. Absolutely. A paragraph. Yep. That's it. You got it. An H3. Yes. Stunning. Oh, you're all web developers already. And why am I even teaching you? You know it all. This is awesome. Okay, we've done the block quote. Fine. Yep. So we are going to have a section. We're going to have an H2. We are going to have an article. So let's put them in now. So after our section, we are going to start a new section. And inside that section, we are going to have our H2, which is going to say projects. And after our H2, we are going to put in an article. And we're going to repeat this article down the page so we can copy and paste it. As you very rightly said, inside our article, we're going to have an H3. And the H3 is going to be the project title. So the first thing we're actually going to build is a little typing game, but we haven't built it yet. So for now, let's just put project title. And then you also very rightly said that we're going to put in a paragraph, and let's use our lorem generator to give us a paragraph. That's enough text there. After our paragraph, we have an anchor tag, which is going to have an href. Again, we don't know where that's going yet. And the first one is going to say, see it live. And the second one is going to say, fork it in GitHub. And after all of these, we're going to put in an image. I'm going to use place kitten for this because we don't have a screenshot of our project just yet. And the alt text is going to be. So let's go on to place kitten. And I just want a nice small picture in here. And I'm going to set it to 300 pixels wide and 200 pixels high. And then what you can do once you've got your article all written out, we can copy this and paste it in 2 more times. So we end up with 3 articles. And if we check out our website in the browser, we should now have 3 articles with titles and some links and a cute picture of a kitten. So everybody, once you have got there, give me your thumbs up in the chat. Oh, and Puff has come to visit again. Hello. You come to say hello to everybody. I'll give everybody some time to catch up. Of course, please do ask any questions if you have any in the chat. Why open another section where there was nothing between the previous section and this one? Okay, nice question. So if we take a look at the design, we have a obvious sort of break in the design between the About Me and the project section. But not only that, we have a break in the content itself. So the About Me section is it's a different piece of content to the project section. One is going to be, you know, a few paragraphs of text about yourself and a quote and a photo of yourself, and one is going to be a list of all the projects that you've worked on. So semantically, these are different sections of content. But it will become a bit clearer later on when we start doing the styling. That's when these sections really start to become useful. Okay. How's everyone doing? I see a few fewer thumbs up. Is anybody struggling? Are we good? Please don't be afraid to ask questions. You know, ask away while you've got me here. Where can we access the recorded session? So Patty will be sending out an email to all attendees with a link to the recorded session. I think GDG will also tweet out a link to the recorded session. And I will also be sharing out the slides, which have all of the notes. So basically, everything that I've said is written down as a script. So if you want to go back and read it, you absolutely can. And I'll share the link to the slides at the end of the session. Oh, I'm sorry, Puff. Are you bored? Cool. Let's move on then. So I'm going to go back to my slides. So this is now what my stunning website looks like. So we have our project section with each project with some text and 2 links and an image. Awesome. Patty has also shared the links in there. So we have built up our article already because y'all are too good at this. So let's move on. Oh no, I've given it away. Okay, well, I've given I've given the game away. My animations haven't worked for the next section. So we're gonna just make a new section with an H2, a paragraph, and an anchor tag. This should be fairly straightforward by now. So let's jump back into our editor. So after my section, we're going to put in a new section. We're going to put in an H2, which says contact. You, of course, don't need to use any of these headings. If you want to make this website about your favorite guinea pig, you absolutely can do. It doesn't need to be a portfolio. This is just a suggestion. You can make this whatever you want it to be. I'm going to put in a paragraph which says something along the lines of in that text. I can't even remember. If you'd like to work with me, you can drop me a message. And in here, we could put an email address. Just a slight warning about putting email addresses in. So I'm going to show you how to do this, and I will leave it up to you as to whether or not you actually want to put your email out on the internet. The problem with putting your email address in mail to links, if you don't have a very good spam setup, is that a lot of bots crawl the web looking for mail to addresses so they can add your email address to spam lists. So just be careful when you're putting mail to links out there. Like maybe set up a spam catcher address. So if you've got a Google account, you can do like plus website contact or something like that, just so that you know where the contact information has come from. So this is going to say talk, and in here we are going to do what is called a mail to link. Looks like this, and then your email address. So I'm going to put email@test.com for now. You can put your actual email address in there, or you can just put a nonsense email in there. What we're doing is practicing right now. And then what will happen is when somebody clicks on that, it'll pop up their installed email solution. So it'll either pop up your Gmail or it'll pop up Outlook or anything with that email address already populated in it, and they'll be able to easily drop you a message. Or, of course, you could put in a link to a Google form in here. There's a whole load of different solutions that you could use. So we're going to move on now to the last bit of our website. So let's jump back to our design. Oh, okay. Here we go. Oh, no. All my images are broken in this. Amazing. Okay. And I've given the game away again. So down at the bottom here, we are going to use a footer. Inside that footer, we're going to put a paragraph, and we're going to put, so these links here, this is going to be a list of links. And whenever you see this sort of repeated small singular content, so repeated different blocks of content should be an article, but repeated singular items of content should be a list. And this is going to be an unordered list of links. So we're going to put a UL in here, and then each of these items inside the UL are going to be LIs. And inside each li is going to be an anchor tag. So this is going to link to my LinkedIn, my Twitter, my GitHub, my YouTube, etc., whatever you would like to link it to. So let's build that out now. Does this pass accessibility? It absolutely will do, and I will show you how. So after our main, we are going to put in our footer. Inside of our footer, we're going to put a UL. And after our UL, we are going to put in a paragraph. And in the paragraph, we're going to put in that copyright information. And we can put in the little copyright symbol by using something called a HTML entity. And so I can use the ampersand symbol and the word copy to make myself a copyright symbol. And then I can say copyright 2023 Jo Franchetti. Something like that. And then inside our UL, as I mentioned, we are going to put in an li. And inside that li, we are going to put in an anchor tag. And each anchor tag, we are going to put text in it that describes where the anchor tag is going. So in this case, linked in. And this is going to be a link to my LinkedIn. There we go. That's my LinkedIn URL. And then we can do some more. So you could put your Twitter in, or your Mastodon, or your GitHub, whatever you like. Whatever you want to put in there, you can put in as many of them as you like as well. And so the question about this passing accessibility, it absolutely does, because we have got the text in there. And what we're going to do is we're going to style it up with a background image, and we're going to visually hide the text, but the text is still there. So a screen reader will still read it out. We will still be able to tab to it and click on this link, but visually it'll look like a graphic. Do we need a new li for each? We absolutely do. I'm sorry, this is me speeding ahead. Good spot. I'm glad you're all much better developers than I am. So your footer should now look like this. And if you open it up in the browser, you should hopefully see you now have your contact section, you have your little let's talk button, and you have a list of links which have bullet points next to them. And your little copyright logo should also be showing there. So I'll leave the markup there for you a little bit longer, and then we will jump into the browser just to see what it looks like. Give me a thumbs up in the chat if you've got your footer and your contact me section all done. I like that William is like not only done, but super done. Awesome, awesome. Okay, I'm going to jump across into the browser and we will take a look at this stunning piece of content that we have just created. So you should now have your contact section with a link in it. And then we've got this. So I was mentioning that a UL has bullet points, so you can see them here. And you can see this little the ampersand copy with the semicolon after it gave us the copyright symbol. And that is an HTML entity. And HTML entities are kind of interesting. There's a whole load of different ones that we can use. So I think there's a really good, is this the one? No, that's not the one. There's a really great website for getting, yes, every single HTML entity you could ever possibly need or want is listed here. And you can use them to add interesting characters into your code. Just kind of fun. And it gives you the code that you need to copy. So this is your HTML code if you want to add that shape into your website. So we have created this absolutely stunning, I hope you agree, website. We have 10 minutes left of the lesson. So what I'm going to make sure that we do is that we save everything that we have written and that we commit it to our Git repository. And then I will talk about what it is that we're going to do in the next lesson. So let's jump back into our editor. So you're going to open up a terminal. So get your terminal open. You're going to make sure, could you please share the link for HTML entities? Absolutely. You're going to make sure that you are in the correct folder in the terminal. So I'm in my workshop folder here. To get to the correct folder, if you need to change folder, don't forget you've got your CD tool, so you can CD up and down. So for me, I would need to CD documents. If I was going to change directory, so I would CD dev and workshop. This is going to be different for you depending on where you've saved your thing. So we have documents dev workshop. If I do my git status, it will tell me, let's make this a bit bigger. It will tell me that I've created these two new files. So I've created index.html and I've created jo.png, and I need to add them. So we're going to do git add, and dot is just a shortcut to say add everything. So git add dot full stop. And now if we do git status, you can see both of those files are green, so they need to be committed. So we're going to say git commit minus am. So we had a look. In fact, let's just do minus m because we've already added them. Forget the a. Git commit minus m, and we're going to say added content added for and press enter. So those changes have now been committed. Now I want to push those changes. So we're going to say git push origin main. And what that is saying is we are on the main branch and we want to push those changes to our origin, which is the one that we set up on GitHub on Monday. And that's just going to push all those changes for us. So now all of my changes are backed up in Git. If you want to see the whole thing, there we go. So we did git add, git commit, and then git push. And if I jump over to my browser again, and I open up GitHub, not that GitHub, I should see, what did I even call it? GDG workshop. Okay, awesome. Yes. So I should now see, if I go to my Git repository, that my index.html is there with all of my markup in it, and my PNG is also there. Awesome. So we have created this stunning piece of work, which I'm sure you might agree doesn't really look anything like the design that we were putting together. So what we are going to do next lesson is we are going to start writing some CSS, and we are actually going to style up our HTML to make it look like this design. If I can get all the way back to the original design on slides. There we go. So we can get it, we're going to make it look like this in the next lesson. So that was a whirlwind tour to HTML. Next, we are going to move on to CSS. I think the CSS will probably take us 2 classes, so it'll be Monday and Wednesday next week. And then after that, we are going to move on to JavaScript. And I just want to say, this is super awesome. Like, getting this whole thing built in one lesson is like really brilliant. You all picked this up super quickly, so you should all be super proud of yourselves. Thank you all so much for being so engaged. It's really lovely to have you all interacting with me. And thank you so much for coming. And you should all be super proud of yourselves.
Thank you, Jo, again for such an amazing session. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining. We will upload the video to the recording to our YouTube channel, and also share the slides. And yeah, see you all next Monday. And thank you again, Jo. You're amazing.
My pleasure. Let me just get everybody the slide deck.
So William is asking if he can get the slides for the first session. Yes, William, if you go to the YouTube channel of GDG Glasgow, I will share it again on the chat. You will find the recording of the first session, and in the description of the video, you will see a link to the slides. Okay, I think that's it. So again, thank you everyone. Thank you, Jo, and see you next week. Bye-bye.
See you next week, everybody.